the committee's inquiry into the accessibility, responsiveness, and service delivery performance of the National Insurance Board of Trinidad and Tobago. My name is Marlene Atz, and I am the chair of the Joint Select Committee for Finance and Legal Affairs in the 13th Republican Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. Permit me to make some opening remarks in terms of the justification for the inquiry. Permit me to give some context. The National Insurance Board of Trinidad and Tobago occupies a uniquely important place in our national landscape. It is a name with which almost every citizen of Trinidad and Tobago is very familiar. For more than half a century, the NIBTT has been the backbone of our social protection system, providing income security to workers, to retirees, to the sick, to injured, and to families in moments of vulnerability, including in times of death. Today, more than 226,000 citizens rely on the NIB benefits. For many retirees, the NIB pension is their primary or even sole source of income. That underscores the weight of the institution's responsibility and the importance of ensuring that its systems function efficiently, fairly, and reliably. In recent years, however, the public has expressed growing concern about delays, communication challenges, access difficulties, and the overall responsiveness of the organization. The Ombudsman reports for 2022 and 2023 highlight this clearly, that the NIB recorded the highest number of complaints among public bodies, and senior officials were summoned on multiple occasions to address administrative and service delivery issues. It is against this backdrop that the committee has initiated this inquiry. Our purpose is not adversarial. And I repeat, it is not adversarial. It is not to duplicate any actuarial reviews or long-term policy exercises, but rather our concern and our remit is to examine the operational performance of the systems through which the NIBTT delivers its services, its customer service, its claims processing, its digital access, records management, staffing, and internal accountability mechanisms. So essentially what we're looking at are the internal processes at the NIB that allow them to effectively serve the people of Trinidad and Tobago. This inquiry is intended to assist both the organization and the people of Trinidad and Tobago. For the NIB, it provides an opportunity to identify bottlenecks, strengthen processes, and support ongoing digital transformation efforts, such as the Empower project, about which we will learn more during the course of this morning's inquiry. For the public, it is our commitment that their concerns are being heard and that Parliament is exercising its oversight role to ensure that essential services are delivered with the efficiency, dignity, and reliability that citizens deserve. Ultimately, this committee's goal is to support the NIBTT as a vital arm of national stability and social protection, because it is our view that a strong, responsive, and accessible NIBTT is in the interest of every worker, every employer, and every family in Trinidad and Tobago. Before I proceed further, I wish to state that members of the public are invited to submit their comments on the Parliament's social media platforms, YouTube channel, ParlView, or via Facebook and X, formerly Twitter. Members of the public can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook at TT Parl Committees for real-time updates and highlights from committee meetings. With those few words of introduction, I will then ask the representatives from the National Insurance Board, the Ministry of Finance, and the National Insurance Appeals Tribunal to introduce themselves, beginning with the NIBTT.
Good morning, Chairman and members. Persad-Poliah, Executive Director of the NIB.
Good morning, Chairman and members as well. Andy Edwards, Chief Operating Officer, Business Services, National Insurance Board.
Good morning, Chairman, members. Michelle Carrington, Chairman, the National Insurance Appeals Tribunal.
Good morning, Chairman and Board. Prakash Ramlochan, Acting Registrar, National Insurance Appeals Tribunal.
Good morning, Chairman and members. Aisha Khan, Executive Manager, Human Resources at the National Insurance Board.
Good morning, Chairman and Board. Sean Waldron, National Insurance Board, Manager, Insurance Operations.
Good morning, Chairman and members. Darian Peters, National Insurance Board, Manager, IT Infrastructure.
Good morning, everyone. Chintamani Suku, Executive Director in Investments, Divestments, Ministry of Finance.
Thank you. Thank you for the introductions. And we will get into that in a little while, but for the interest of our listening and viewing public, there is a relationship between the Ministry of Finance and the National Insurance Appeals Tribunal, and we'll get into that as the morning progresses. So the Ministry of Finance, we wish to welcome the Ministry of Finance's representative to today's inquiry. May I now invite the members of the committee to introduce themselves. If I may begin with the Deputy Chair. Remind members to turn on their mics so that we record it properly.
Over. Yeah, Satyakama Maharaj, Vice Chairman.
Davish Maharaj, Member of Parliament, Minister of Justice, Member.
Rishad Sitran, Member of Parliament, Minister in the Ministry of Health.
Leroy Batiste, Member and Minister of Labour, Small and Micro Enterprise Development.
Brian Manning, Member of Parliament.
Vishnu Danpal, Member.
Thank you so much. Again, for the benefit of the viewing and listening public, and I hope many persons are out there tuning into this very important inquiry, I wish to advise that we have 4 particular objectives that have been identified for this inquiry. And these objectives are to evaluate the efficiency and effectiveness of the NIB's service delivery systems, their administrative processes, and client interface mechanisms as they relate to the delivery of its core services such as benefit claims, registration, and contribution management. The second objective is to identify operational constraints, capacity limitations, and systemic gaps affecting service delivery, accessibility, and customer experience, including issues related to staffing, technology, records management, and interagency coordination. The third objective is to assess the extent to which existing digital transformation initiatives have improved service delivery performance and to identify any constraints affecting full implementation of these digital platforms. And the final objective is to consider whether the current service delivery arrangements at the NIB currently adequately address the needs of vulnerable groups, including retirees, persons with disabilities, and persons with limited digital access. So against the backdrop of those 4 objectives, I now wish to invite the Executive Director of the NIB to make some brief opening remarks. I will then invite the Ministry of Finance representative and then thirdly the Chairman of the NIAT. So Ms. Persad-Poliah.
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I do so on behalf of the board and management of the National Insurance Board of Trinidad and Tobago, and I welcome the committee's oversight and inquiry into the accessibility, responsiveness, and service delivery performance of the NIB. I also welcome the opportunity to place on record the progress made by the organization, as well as the operational realities shaping our current environment. Over recent years, the NIB has embarked upon a comprehensive transformation of its systems, processes, and operating model through the Empower program. This program is designed to modernize a long-standing paper-based environment and to ensure that the organization is better positioned to deliver efficient, transparent, and accessible services to contributors, beneficiaries, and employers. This transformation has been undertaken while the NIB continues to provide uninterrupted service to the public. As a result, careful balancing has been required across staffing deployment, workflows, and service delivery channels during the transition period. The service experiences reported during this period reflect the practical realities of managing large-scale institutional end-to-end transformations while maintaining continuity of service to the national population. At the same time, Member and Chairman, recent reforms to the national insurance system have been implemented to strengthen the long-term viability of the fund. These reforms are expected to support sustainability and financial growth over time, thereby reinforcing the capacity of the NIB to meet its obligations to current and future beneficiaries while maintaining confidence in the system as a whole. The board and management of the NIB are unequivocally committed to the successful delivery of the Empower transformation and to the continuous improvement of service to the public. We are taking, Chairman, deliberate and sustained action to strengthen systems, streamline processes, and enhance service delivery across all channels. As this work advances, our focus remains clear: to deliver timely, reliable, and accessible services, and to ensure, Chair, that every citizen receives the benefits and support that they are entitled to. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much for that, Mrs. Persad-Poliah. May I now invite Ms. Suku from the Ministry of Finance to make some brief opening remarks?
Good morning, everyone. So the Investments Division of the Ministry of Finance is responsible for providing oversight and monitoring of state enterprises. We also provide support to the National Insurance Appeals Tribunals, and we thank you for the invitation to this meeting today, and we look forward to a very fruitful and productive session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and of course, may I now invite Ms. Carrington, the Chairman of the National Insurance Appeals Tribunal, to give her opening remarks.
Good morning again, everyone. Thanks for this opportunity to share and to participate in this inquiry. The National Insurance Appeals Tribunal falls under the remit of Ministry of Finance, at least the operational aspect of it. So the Ministry of Finance is responsible for funding, staffing, and the general operations. The tribunal itself, the chair sits, which is myself, and then we have members representing trade unions, business, and government for North, South, and Tobago. Those sittings, we try to keep them on a monthly basis, and of course the tribunal acts as an independent line of adjudication between NIBTT and the appellants, persons who feel aggrieved by NIB's decision. So again, we are happy to be here and look forward to the fruitful benefits that may come out of this inquiry.
Thanks again for that insight, Ms. Carrington. I want to begin by asking a couple of questions based on the submission. Just again to set some context for the persons who might be viewing online or following us on the various digital platforms. One of the reasons I would have stated the 4 objectives of this inquiry is because that is the context within which questions would have been posed to the respective organizations, to the NIBTT, to NIAT, and of course the Ministry of Finance would have been inside of that process, given the relationship between the NIAT and the Ministry of Finance. So the 4 overarching objectives that I would have outlined, that is really the framework within which questions were posed and submissions were made by the respective entities. So what will follow questions based on the submissions coming from the NIB or from the NIAT. But our viewing and listening public, they are reminded that feel free to use social media platforms to submit any questions. And I know this is not quite a hot topic, but it is one of those topics that impact on the lives of many citizens throughout Trinidad and Tobago. So please feel free to use our social media platforms to submit any questions or queries that you may have, because this is an opportunity for you to have those questions or queries tabled and responded to by the officials of the NIBTT and also of the NIAT. Before we proceed further, I would just like to ask our member, Sobers, Minister Sobers, just to introduce himself so that he's on the record as being participating today.
Good day, everyone. I do apologize for my tardiness. I'm Sean Sobers, member. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Sobers. So if I may begin, and I wish to start the ball rolling by posing a question to the NIB, and again, our remit is to better understand your operations, get the country to better understand your operations, so that we can identify what gaps there may be and what opportunities there are to do things better for the benefit of citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. So while it's called an inquiry, we're really having a conversation, a sharing of information. So I want us to be very clear on that. So in the scope of NIB's operations, because everyone who comes into NIB thinks that their matter is the most important matter that NIB has to deal with. So let us, for the benefit of the population, place the scope of NIB's operations in context. So could you provide us, Ms. Persad-Poliah, with a sense of the size of the NIB's clientele? In other words, how many workers and employers are registered with NIB at your most recent count? The estimated value of the benefits claims that were made in the last financial year, just to get a sense of what you're dealing with, because I know you mentioned in your opening comments sustainability of the fund, which is not quite the remit of today's inquiry, but I know it will tickle some thoughts from among members around the table. If you can also share, for the benefit of our population, the total value of actual benefits that have been paid out in the last financial year, and some sense of the total number of customers or persons who visit the NIB service centers on an annual basis, just for again, for the benefit of the committee, but also for the viewing public, the population, to understand that while all claims are important, sometimes there's a lot of things that you have to be dealing with, and it will then help us guide the conversation moving forward. So those are my opening questions to you. If you can give the population and the committee a sense of what really is involved in the NIB on a day-to-day basis in terms of claims and number of clients, etc., that you may serve.
Sure, Chairman. Good morning again to everyone. So the NIB is a 54-year-old organization, and we are primarily paper-based. And I will come to why we are moving away from paper-based into our empowered digital solutions. So by way of context, 54-year-old organization, primarily paper-based. Our beneficiaries we serve every month amount to approximately 230,000 beneficiaries are in receipt of a monthly payment at the NIB. And when taken into context, Chairman, approximately 226,618 of those, or thereabouts, are long-term beneficiaries. So of a beneficiary of 230,000, the majority of those are long-term beneficiaries. Our benefit payments for the year ended June 2025, we paid out $6.6 billion in benefits. We collected just over $5 billion in benefits. Naturally, there's a shortfall, which we would have, of course, used our investment income and other incomes to support. And allow me to also say how grateful we are for the reform that would have recently been shared, because, of course, it would significantly support the sustainability of the organization. In terms of, Chairman, you asked in terms of claims received. On average, we receive about 42,000 claims per year, between 42,000 and 45,000. And for the year ended June 2025, we would have received just about 42,000 claims. From a customer base point of view, Chairman, we serve over 600,000 or so insured persons, 600,000 insured persons contributing into the fund to pay out to over 233,000 beneficiaries. Our active employer base stands somewhere between 14 to 15,000 employers who pay monthly, but our actual employer base on file is just about 18,000 employers, but not all actually pay monthly contributions. In terms of our employees, Chairman, which is, I believe, one of our most valuable assets, we operate with just over 600 employees. So if we put that into context, Chair, we have 600,000 beneficiaries, 223,000 of which we pay monthly, and 600 employees servicing those beneficiaries. Just, of course, to share further that we operate a very lean ship. We are very cost conscious. And in terms of our administrative costs, we operate just about $286 million in administrative expenditure per year, which represents just about 5% of our annual contribution income. Of course, Chairman, in terms of the health of the fund, we stand strong at $27 billion. And as I said before, we're grateful for the reform, $27 billion. We're grateful for the reform that will further enhance our sustainability.
Thank you for that. And I think just trying to absorb the numbers, 600 employees for over 600,000 beneficiaries of 600 employees.
600 employees,
600,000
insured
persons, and 226 long-term beneficiaries.
That's correct.
Yes, so the arithmetic there already is a little mind-boggling in terms of the ratios of staff to customer service, as it were. So we understand that there's some human resources challenges, and you did identify that you have, I think, 27 vacancies on your establishment, or thereabouts, somewhere in the tune of 20-something, but there has been a hold on that given the transition towards the digital transformation. I think I recall seeing that from your submission.
There are about the organization is over, in 80% of the organization, Chairman, is filled. We have about 19% vacancies. But in terms of our frontline staff, the majority of those vacancies are not with our frontline staff. They are with other positions that we have strategically placed on hold pending the outcome of the Empower project.
Yeah, that's what you mentioned in the submission. But again, and I appreciate the clarity. So it's not the front line that is affected, but in terms of the people who might be redeployed or deployed in to deal with some of the other strategic areas. I want to, before I ask some of the members to chime in terms of their questions, one of the things that occurred to me as we're having the conversation, as you were talking about service delivery and frontline staff, I wanted to dive in to one of the questions that we wish to raise in terms of service delivery. Are all of your 14 service centers uniformly equipped to provide the same level of service? And I'm thinking particularly about rural or underserved communities, and I'm also thinking about disabled in our society who may be in need of benefits or services coming out of the NIB. So I wanted to find out whether you're able to clarify for us whether all of your service centers are uniformly equipped, looking particularly at the rural underserved communities, and also adding on the disabled in our midst who may need to access services at your service centers.
So, Chairman, yes, all 14 service centers across Trinidad and Tobago are open and fully equipped to serve the public.
At the same levels?
Absolutely, absolutely. When we look at the rural areas, though, I assume we're looking at places like Sangre Grande, Point Fortin, our service centers in Sangre Grande, Point Fortin, Rio Claro, Siparia, Princestown. they are all equipped with the same consistent levels of operations, correct? And allow me to also share, member, that in terms of accessibility, they are all accessible to the disabled in the same fashion.
Accessibility in terms of physical accessibility, but in terms of the service delivery, do they get the same level of service delivery? Not only limited to accessibility in terms of things like ramps and the infrastructure that you have, but also in terms of the customer service that is available to them. So if you have someone who is visually impaired, if you have someone who has a hearing impairment, all of these things. So if you can just, if you could elaborate on that a bit for us.
So, Chair, the services provided at a service center in Port of Spain is identical to the services provided at a service center in Sangre Grande or Rio Claro. All our service centers are equipped with our customer service representatives, our supervisors, our managers, and the service that is offered is consistent across the nation. In terms of training, what we have found, Chairman, is that there are some areas of inconsistency in terms of the information being provided to some of our customers. We have not often, but we are sometimes told that if a customer visits a North branch, they have a different information from that if they were to visit a South branch. And we are taking urgent and immediate steps to support that and via our training. So our head of HR has been instrumental in providing training in terms of consistency of information to all our CSRs to ensure that what the information that is shared to the public is consistent across all our service centers.
Okay, I don't want to, I hear you and I appreciate, but I don't want to belabor the point, but I want to stretch it a bit. When I ask about service to disabled persons, how is it delivered? How is it delivered to them? Because a disabled person may have, if they're visually impaired, you can't tell them to look at the form, you can't tell them to check your website. If they have a hearing impairment, you can't tell them. So I'm asking specifically what measures, what mechanisms, are there mechanisms in place to deal with such persons?
So the answer to that then, Chairman, will be no. But what we do when those persons do visit our service centers, our CSRs are in place to support those persons. That's okay.
My apologies, yes.
That's okay. So
So you said no, that you don't have services for...
No,
okay.
No. I mean, but what happens on any given day is that our customer service representatives would sit with those persons and take them through the form and support them in terms of whether they're visually impaired or otherwise. What we have seen is usually those persons are accompanied by an aide. In fact, just as recently as you, I'm sure you would have known that we are operating our Saturday overtime services since last Saturday in an effort to provide more service to the public. And I was actually at the Shagona Service Center on Saturday supporting my customer service representatives with claimants, and a visually impaired person did come to the counter, and she was assisted by an aide. So what we did, as best as possible, the customer service rep would have engaged with the aide and provided information in writing, because the aide that was present with her was not visually impaired. Yeah.
All right, thank you for that. Minister Maraj, I think you wanted to pose some questions. I know you have other commitments, but you wanted to pose some questions.
So I'll be very short, though, because we have to run off. Thank you very much, Director, for giving us that overview of NIB. I didn't realize how large the institution was, so it was a very helpful bit of information. As an MP, many of my constituents visit me, and there are many complaints about NIB and grants from the ministries and so on. One this week, which was 2 days ago, funeral grant. They came to me saying that you all had a limit of 1 month to apply for it? Was that an accurate statement or misinformation?
That is not correct.
Is there a time limit for it?
Funeral grants are available up to 3 months from the date of death and up to 12 months with a letter, with an accompanying letter.
Repeat that last bit for me, please.
So funeral grants are available to our public within 3 months from the date of death, and continues to be accessible to the public up to 1 year once the application is accompanied by a letter.
Okay, so there was a bit of information, misinformation they would have received at some office of the NIB.
Can you just confirm, again, it's not just for us in the room, but for the public, the letter that you says need to accompany the late application, the letter needs to detail what information? So you said 3 months post-death.
Correct.
And then up to 12 months, up to 9 months thereafter, so a total of 12 months, okay, from the date of death. So the letter that is to accompany the late claim, the post 3 months claim, that letter needs to contain what kind of information?
Basic information, Chairman, because the benefit period basically is between 1 and 3 months. We call what is called a late letter, basically giving an explanation to the NIB as to why the application is being submitted late.
Do you think, what is the reason for having a cutoff period, considering that it's a debt grant and may not affect NIB adversely if it's beyond a year? Is there any reason for having such a time period?
Member, I will have to confirm, but I'm almost confident it is a legislative provision. I think it is contained in our benefit regulations as to the time frame for the submission of the application.
So do you think that that possibly should be amended, or you're comfortable with having that time period?
I'm comfortable at this point, and the reason why I'm saying that, member, is that I'm not aware, persons have not actually come forward to us. We don't have the feedback or the data to suggest that persons are being disenfranchised.
Okay.
So at this point, without that data, I am comfortable with the time frame being for 1 year.
Okay, just one other question before I sign off. In terms of appeals to the tribunal, and I think this may be both yourself and Ms. Carrington, with respect, and I have a note here, with respect to appeals falling outside of the time frame, so you have time frames for appealing as well. Staff of the tribunal will generally appeal to the appellants to withdraw matters. However, many prefer to still present themselves to argue their claims. Why is that a stringent time period for appeals, considering that you may get people of the lower income bracket who are accessing this sort of service? And they may not know of time frames, and why are these stringent time frames involved in the appeal process?
Okay, good morning again. As indicated by Ms. Poliah, these things are provided for within the legislation, and therefore the tribunal hands are generally tied when it comes to ruling on matters that are outside a statutory time frame. The legislation states clearly the person has 6 months to appeal, and a further 6 months with a letter, again with a rationale as to why you did not appeal within that 6-month period. So you've been out of the country, you were ill, you simply submit a letter, and yes, it will be accepted. So yes, you have a 12-month window, but that is legislated.
And
so our hands are tied with respect to that.
Do you have a discretion outside of the 1 year?
No, we don't.
And therefore, do you think, are you serving the community, the citizenry, with that sort of stringent time frame, or do you think that that can be amended to assist more people who are appealing?
I would say we have a significant number of appeals that come to us outside of the time frame, which is why you find a number of persons actually wanting to present themselves before the tribunal to argue their case. And reasons vary from persons not aware that NIB would have settled a claim or disallowed it. So it could be the correspondence didn't reach to them on time. It could be the quantum went to their bank, but they didn't recognize, let's say it's a retirement grant and they were expecting a pension. They didn't recognize it got there. So you find a number of reasons and persons. So we have a significant number of appeals that have to be disallowed because they are outside of the window. So
all right, so the question was, I don't think you addressed the question, but maybe I will just refocus. Do you think that that should be changed to allow people greater access to the appeal procedure?
Well, that's what I was alluding to. Yes, I think
I
there
didn't get
should
a
be
yes.
some kind.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I will take your leave now.
Sure, certainly, Minister. We just did a quick check, and all of these are in fact ring-fenced in the legislation. And if I can just probe a bit more, do you think it will benefit the citizens? It's essentially a cost benefit I want to ask. It will always benefit the citizens because if they don't know about the time frame and they miss out, if there is an opportunity for us to review the legislative framework and to, I don't want to put a time frame involved, but a review of the legislative framework around the time frames, do you think that that is going to, it will of course redound to the benefit of the citizens who may not have submitted their claim on time, but is it going to impose difficulties, operational challenges for the NIB in terms of meeting these claims after the prescribed period? Because to me, if there is an opportunity, and these time frames probably were from when when the legislation was first implemented, which is 54 years ago. So we've moved a long way. The population has grown. There are all sorts of socioeconomic dynamics and demographic dynamics. If there were an opportunity for us to review the legislative framework, will it impose operational challenges on the NIB?
So, member, in terms of operational challenges, I don't see that as an issue. So if for example, the amendment were to be that we move it from 1 year to 2 years, naturally the file will be retained and we will stand ready to support in the processing of the application. However, allow me to share that the National Insurance Board serves the most vulnerable in society. And we have not seen, when those applications are made, those persons require the money immediately, almost immediately. So in terms of extending the time frame for the submission of the application, in my respectful view, I don't see that actually benefiting the claimants because it is they actually come to us immediately for support. However, in terms of NIAT, I can understand if you would wish to extend the time frame for the filing of an appeal. Because if the person is in fact aggrieved by the decision made by the NIB and for whatever reason is not informed of it, then I do feel that we could probably consider extending the time frame for the submission of the appeal, because that might better serve the most vulnerable in society.
In terms of being able to follow up with an appeal.
Correct.
Minister?
I was about to leave, but just to take up that point, the appeals, according to the information that we have received, there are a lot of appeals that are being allowed. So therefore, people are getting relief at the tribunal. However, some are being locked out because of the time period. So that's the point. So it's maybe no stress on your part, on the NIB part, but certainly for the people who are being disallowed, they are not getting what is supposed to be due to them. So that's the point I was on.
And I think on that note, from the appeal side, Ms. Carrington, if there were the opportunity to review the legislative framework to allow for persons, and I take the executive director, the NIB executive director's point that persons who need these, but let us not fool ourselves. Not everyone is aware of how to navigate the system to get the information. So even though they might be in need of the support, they may not be aware of how to navigate because of where they are socioeconomically or demographically. They may not be aware. So I want us to make that point very clear, that while many persons will access the benefits available to them, not everyone who's in need either has the wherewithal or the know-how. But in terms of extending the period for the tribunals, coming back to my question about the cost benefit, it will always benefit those persons in our society who may wish to lodge an appeal and who may have to navigate understanding how to lodge that appeal. If the legislation were to be reviewed to extend the period during which someone can lodge an appeal, would that impose a hardship on NIAT? And I'm probably opening a door here in terms of resources and all of those things, but I think it's an important question that Minister Maraj is raising on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, including his constituents. So if you can get some feedback from Ms. Carrington in terms of her thoughts on that.
Certainly a review of the legislation is necessary when you look at how archaic it may have been and the workforce it was treating with back then when you look at the size of the working population now. So it means that we will have a significant more number of appeals, and if you're granting more time, certainly because persons now have time to gather their alternative evidence, etc., to come forward. I think it also has to work in tandem with communication, because the majority of persons who don't appeal on time is because they are unaware that there is an institution that could accommodate that. So that is the other thing. Certainly, it's going to have an impact on the tribunal, because as you see, we have a rolling backlog, and the tribunal, while it is functional, we certainly do not have the capacity to treat with the number of appeals that come in, at least to me, in an efficient manner, because you're looking, as you said, disadvantaged persons who need their money, and I repeatedly say at hearings, we have a number of persons dying waiting to have claims settled. So
lots of things that you highlighted there that I know has piqued the interest of members. Thank you, Minister. But I want I want to raise the issue of the ruling appeals. There's a number of 1,100 that has surfaced. So in the documentation provided to us, that's the magic number of appeals that keep rolling over and over and over. And you know what they say, rolling stone, no moss, and all of these things. What are the challenges in terms of addressing that rolling number? Because that's just for the benefit again of the population listening and viewing. Those are the ones that just keep rolling over year after year, in addition to the new ones that are turning up on an annual basis. So walk us through that and how we might be able to elucidate the issues behind those rolling appeals, and how we might actually be able to try to bring this into a space where we're not problem solvers, but certainly we can highlight some of the challenges that you're facing with a view to bringing it to some kind of alternative authority in terms of how we can address these issues.
It's a real issue. It is one that I have looked at repeatedly together with the small staff at NIAT. We have sought to analyze the types of appeals and the reason for the backlog. We have approximately 20% of those persons may have been deceased. Contact information cannot be found. The registrar.
Sorry, they're deceased while they're and then they pass. Okay, all right, okay. So they died waiting for a response.
Yes. We would generally try to contact the next of kin in that matter to find out whether they wish to pursue the matter or wish to withdraw. In some instances, we cannot find any contact information. We try to contact the last employer listed on the appeal. So we have about 20% of those no contact, and we work in collaboration with NIB in trying to contact persons in this regard. We don't simply go with the information we have. Then we have a significant portion. Okay, so let me explain a bit of the process. When we get an appeal, we would submit the appeal to NIBTT so that they can give us the file and their rationale, their reason for the disallowance. So you have both sides. And then we list the matter for hearing. We have another 30%, approximately 30% of those matters where NIBTT would have said to us, the file cannot be found, the investigation has not been completed. So there was a time I would list these matters, and you would have seen in my response submitted, you would see a significant amount of adjournments. It's because either the investigation is incomplete or the alternative evidence provided by the appellant can't stand on its own. Many times I tried to say, I want to give you the benefit of the doubt. So you ask NIB to complete the investigation, you ask the appellant to go back to your former employer to see whether you can get any alternative evidence that could withstand scrutiny. So you find that roll over include cases like those. Yeah?
All right. I just want to, I know Minister Sobers and Minister Sicharan had questions, but I just want to ask one follow-up question to what you just said. So in the case of someone filing an appeal, they may have insufficient information, you're trying to contact them, the information isn't available, readily available, etc. The extent to which there is interagency collaboration with the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, because even though you may not be able to get the information, you may not be able to follow the breadcrumbs or the trail to the individual based on what they've submitted, is there an opportunity for you to get information from the Ministry of Social Development? Is that an avenue open to you to get information, or are there distinct sets of, because I'm thinking, if it is an individual who falls within a vulnerable category, maybe they may also be as part of the database of the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. Is there that kind of interagency collaboration, or is your source of information strictly the NIBTT?
Currently, we do not work with social welfare. I think it's something that can be useful. What we tend to do is go to former employers. We reach out to NIBTT to see whether the person had any other contact information there as well. But it's a useful suggestion.
All right, and this is what I like. I like us to try to find ways, use these inquiries to identify ways to solve problems in the interest of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So I recognize Minister Sobers, Minister Sicharan, and then MP Manning in that order, and then Senator Dan Paul. Minister Sobers.
Hi, I know, good morning everyone again. I know we may have passed this topic, so please excuse me for revisiting it. Member Maraj spoke about constituents coming to his office, making certain inquiries about persons making applications for the death benefits, I believe it was, right? And persons complaining as to the process being a bit cumbersome. I know that it may very well be settled in the legislation, but for members of the listening and viewing public, can you just carry us through what documentation the deceased next of kin would need to provide to your good selves for them to procure that death benefit grant? When I mean the death benefit grant, the funeral grant, yes.
Yeah. Yes, members and Chair, the customer just has to bring an invoice from the funeral home and any other receipt relating to the funeral expense, and they are able to apply for the funeral grant. I would like to also advise that our funeral grants are turned over within a one-day turnaround time period. So a high percentage, over 99% of our customers who come into the National Insurance Board are able to get their funeral grant amount within 24 hours. Yes, the amount of the funeral grant is 7,500. That's the value of the funeral grant in Trinidad and Tobago.
Are you absolutely certain that there are no other documents?
I stand corrected to.
There are other documents?
No, he's correct. The application form, of course, must be completed and submitted along with the death certificate and a copy of the invoice from the funeral home. Those are the three documents that we look for processing of the funeral grant.
Right, and again, I do apologize. I hate to waste time. Can you just tell me basically what is on that form that you're referring to that the person has to fill out?
So I will put this question to my head of operations, Sean Waldron.
Good morning, member. Good morning, chair. The form, it's a KYC form. So the form would ask the name.
Could we just, since we're dealing with a diverse audience, not just us in the room, we're dealing with John and Jane Public in Trinidad and Tobago, so let's avoid acronyms and abbreviations like KYC. So if we can just spell it out, please. Thank you.
Sorry, my apologies. The form would ask for personal information, the name of the deceased, the national insurance number of the deceased, last place of work for the deceased. And then the form would also ask for the information pertaining to the person applying for the benefit. One piece of information that we could put out to the public to avoid any delays in any future applications. The invoice from the funeral home should have the name of the person that's applying for the benefit, because the payment that we are being made will be made under that name. The NI number for the deceased is also necessary, because that's what we utilize to check the system to ensure that they have the required contribution amount.
So let's say, for example, the contribution amounts have been paid by the deceased person, and for some reason the identification card of the deceased has expired. Would that pose a problem in terms of that form that you're mentioning?
So remember, just to be clear, the identification of the deceased has expired, not the application, the ID of the applicant. The deceased has expired. With the deceased being expired, we still would accept the application and process the application.
And let's say that the applicant now, his identification card has expired. Would that affect the processing of the documents?
Yes, member, that would affect the application if the applicant ID expires.
So essentially what you're telling the public is that I am a son, bereaved son, who just lost his mother. I don't have an identification card. I fill out all of the other relevant documents pertaining to my mother who has paid her NIB contributions. She is dead. It's $7,500. I do have my ID card because I am delinquent. My mother will not get the $7,500. That's the position.
So, member, thank you for the question, right? Understand the need for one form of ID is not unique to the National Insurance Board. Almost every institution that we deal with in this country requires at least one form of identification. In that particular case, we will give the son the opportunity to either renew whether it is a driver's permit, a passport, or identification card, but the application must be accompanied, member, by a valid identification.
I raise that question because I am acutely aware that there are provisions made for funeral homes when they come and they make the application. And so a funeral home would come to make the application on behalf of the deceased. They drag the relative who, at the end of the day, sometimes they don't have the relevant documentation, like an identification card, which is not beyond any of us in this room, that some persons in this country don't have ID cards, they can't find their birth certificates, they've never obtained a passport. That is a reality in this country. But for some reason, the funeral home can come, they fill out the relevant documentation, the person is in fact dead, the person is going to be buried by the funeral home, and yet the check is cut, and it's not cut to the person, obviously, the deceased relative, but it's cut to the funeral home. So there's an exception that is being made for certain funeral homes in this country. But when the deceased person who comes, they have an arrangement with the funeral home, they may not be as tethered to the funeral home as others. They are dispossessed and disenfranchised and disadvantaged as opposed to the person who has a relationship with the funeral home. And I'm not asking you, I'm telling you, because I was part of a process where that occurred.
Member, thank you for sharing. I am not personally privy to that matter, but I'll be happy to take some information because an investigation will be required.
No investigation is required. I sent a pre-action protocol letter and it was dealt with eventually. But I'm saying that it is easy for us to sit here and try to divulge information on forms and whatnot. And maybe you have, I suspect, I cast no aspersions, a large amount of very good CSRs. But there are CSRs who really drag their feet and don't assist persons in times where they are in maybe the most heart-wrenching moments in their lives. And that is important then for the people who they meet and they greet on their first instance, that they take those things into consideration and treat with it directly.
Thanks for that intervention, Minister Sobers. But I want to extract from the Minister's question an important dimension. We talk about vulnerable, we talk about rural, disenfranchised, sorry, not disenfranchised, underserved communities, etc. And in Minister Sobers's, I've culled from his contribution an important thing. What happens if I happen to be in an underserved community, having my driver's permit, I may not have a driver, having my ID card renewed, because the only time my ID card really becomes important is every 5 years if I need to vote. It is difficult for me to have that renewed. What alternative system, and I am sure we're speaking to somebody somewhere in Trinidad and Tobago right now, what opportunity is there for me or my relatives to have, well, one, let's be honest, and I'm asking, I'm not casting an aspersion, I want to borrow that from, is the NIB satisfied that the average citizen of Trinidad and Tobago understands this process, one? And two, what opportunity is there if I happen to be residing in an underserved area where I discover in the heat of the moment, in the throes of my bereavement, I discover that my ID card has expired and I can't really get it done in short order? What, if any, what if any alternative arrangement can be put in place or is in place at the NIB? Distilling, as I said, from Minister Sobers's question to the committee.
Chairman and members, that is something very important for us to consider. I want to ask my Manager of Insurance Operations if there's any other provision, if he could provide information regarding that alternative to submitting the identification card currently in existence. But I could tell you there has not been any tremendous feedback we have gotten, I think, from the public. I think in the main, we have been able to satisfy our public with our
But I want us to be clear, not to cut across you, Mr. Edwards. I want us to be clear. The fact that you haven't heard about it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
I know.
And we have realities in our country where, I could be living in a part of the world where everything I need to do happens in a central location, and I'm trying to manage costs, I'm trying to manage transportation, I'm trying to bury my loved one, I'm trying to deal with a time of grief, and I'm simply asking, and it's not a trick question. Remember, I said from the outset, we are here to support you and to support the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and if together we can arrive at a workable solution so that people who are listening and viewing, and they can then tell the neighbor, or they know somebody right now who's going through this. So I would give you the opportunity to ask your colleague in operations what alternative arrangement can be put in place for someone who realistically might be in this situation.
Yes, totally agree, Madam Chair and members, and we certainly will look to see, depending on what feedback we receive, how we can adjust where possible in this instance.
Hang on, I thought we were going to have feedback from the operations person. Has he been put on the spot?
Hi, good morning, Chair, morning, member. Thanks for that question. And as you mentioned previously, we are here to aid the public of Trinidad and Tobago. at the NIB, and what we want to do is put this information again to the public. One piece of important information is that the payment for the funeral grant in particular is made payable to the name of the person on the receipt from the funeral home. So with the public listening in, if at any point in time you're in the unfortunate situation where you do need to make that application, make the checks to ensure that your identification is current. In the situation where your identification isn't current or it's in an expired state, you can have the funeral home make the receipt name in the name of a family member, a brother, or sister, and we could ensure also that that family member or that person's identification is current. So they could come into the board, make the application, and the check payment would be made under that name. And as Mr. Sobers mentioned, in the event that you're not in a position to have a family member, you don't have someone that you could have the application made in, the home could make the payment and reimburse the payment to you. So we do have options available to make sure that no one under these unforeseen circumstances go unheard.
All right, so just to be clear, for my edification and for the edification of the public, ideally, I need to have a valid form of identification. If I'm the person who has made all of the arrangements and paid the funeral home, I can then apply and get my money reimbursed, my $7,500. Well, I can get the $7,500. I can benefit from the $7,500 grant. That's the ideal. If I do not have a valid identification for whatever reason, I can engage friend, family, somebody else to make the application on their behalf, but the receipt is not in their name. So how do we mitigate incidents of fraud? Just putting that out there. If I'm understanding you correctly. And then the third, so that's the second scenario, and the third scenario is the funeral home. And again, I'm drilling down on these issues because there's somebody out there who is in this situation right now. And we want to find a way to help them in real time. And the third scenario we've identified is where the funeral home can make the application in their name, get the $7,500 grant for the deceased, and then ostensibly reimburse it to the family or pay it over to the family, as the case might be, if the family member does not have the identification. But my concern is with scenario 2, where, who then qualifies to make the application, and how do we mitigate possibility of fraud?
Thank you, Chair. And that's, my apologies for not making that clear. The invoice from the home, so what I'm saying, so the invoice from the home, whatever name is on the invoice for the home, that should be the person, that must be the person making the application.
Must or should? Must. Must, okay.
Must. So what I'm saying is, for the public, if at any point in time that they're in that unfortunate situation, check their identification. If their identification is expired, turn to a brother, turn to a family member that has a valid, up-to-date identification, and have the home make the receipt in their names.
All right, we'll probably circle back to this, but we have some other members who have been waiting. So Minister Sicharan, I know you've been waiting, MP Manning, and then Minister Batiste. You can circle back to the question, Minister Batiste, but I just wanted to give the other members opportunity. They've been waiting a while.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. My question is to go back to something that was raised earlier, and it's regards to the synergy between the NIBTT and the NIAT. And with regards to reducing the backlog and the number of unresolved appeals. And my question to either entity is, what progress has been made in improving the working relationship between both entities in the recent past, and what is the status of the proposed interagency working committee? Any entity could answer.
I will start. The recommendation for the interagency working committee, we had 2 or 3 meetings in 2022, and the Memorandum of Understanding was drafted and presented for sign-off. Unfortunately, the officer who was treating with that would have left the institution, I believe Mr. Ashok Baru, and that working committee ceased to operate in that fashion. It doesn't mean that we don't have great working relationships. I personally think we have a great working relationship with NIBTT. We have a number of formal and informal meetings, a lot more informal meetings post the hearings, because during the hearings, a number of operational issues may be raised. Persons may raise things like the inconsistency with the information they got at San Fernando as opposed to Tunapuna and things like that. And after the hearing, we would generally sit and have discussions on some of these things. With respect to the adjournments, it is one of the pet peeves. I have been trying to find a way to reduce the number of adjournments, because I believe when we schedule a matter, we should really try to expedite it, because we have limited hearings and so many times you have to keep adjourning the matters. So as recent as last October, we would have had a working session with the manager appeals, with legal, and I think one of the directors, executive directors, where we would have gone through trying to find some kind of solution where NIBTT cannot complete the investigation or the file cannot be found to present it to us for listing of the matter. And at that point in time, we made a decision that we would give NIBTT 3 months to either create a new file, whether it means reaching out to the employers, whether it means reaching out to the appellants, but create something. Otherwise, the matter would be listed and we would use the alternative evidence as provided by the appellant and list the matters. Unfortunately, right after that, we would have lost our register, but we now have a new acting registrar, and the first hearing post that meeting would be next Tuesday, where we have listed some of those matters, and I'm hopeful that NIBTT would have completed their investigations. I know some of them, they already said to us they were not able to complete the investigations, but we are going forward.
Thank you. So in your determination, there's an excellent working relationship between both entities, and there really isn't a need for the interagency working committee?
Oh no, I certainly think there's need for this committee, because it will formalize some of the meetings. It would allow for us to work on things like a case management solution, allow us to get things a lot faster. So yes, there is certainly need for it. It's just the commitment on both sides, I guess, and having members who are willing to spare the time to do it.
So can there be an undertaking that in the future this is something that you would possibly want to revisit, the creation of this committee?
Yes, we would want to, but it may come with some kind of revised structure for NIAT, because the workload can be a bit much when you have one chairperson responsible for treating with all hearings as well as treating with being a member of a committee, because remember, this is not a full-time thing. Yeah.
I just want to use Chair's prerogative and jump the queue a little bit. In your submission, in NIAT's submission, you spoke about, you've recommended legislative amendments to accommodate virtual hearings and the acceptance of electronic documents and signatures. Where are we? Has a formal proposal been submitted? Because I'm hearing backlog, I'm hearing efficiency, I'm hearing resources, I'm hearing one assistant registrar, I'm hearing all of these things. And I recognize that these are almost universal constraints in the public sector. And I'll get to empower in a while, but I'm saying we survived a catastrophic event like COVID-19, which kind of catapulted us into the world of online meetings and digital submissions, etc. And I am therefore asking whether this is a real proposal that you think has been submitted, you're contemplating, not you per se, so it's not Ms. Carrington, but whether NIAT is seriously contemplating a formal proposal to give effect to the recommendation for this digital platform, or you can look to the Ministry of Finance, because I understand that the Ministry of Finance really is the hierarchy inside of there. Because really, we're trying to find, not everyone will be able to take advantage and to leverage digital platforms, but some persons might. And it therefore means that you will be able to navigate through different, across both spaces. Is this something that you think you would give serious consideration to advancing? So Ms. Carrington, and also the Ministry of Finance, if the Ministry of Finance wishes to opine on this.
Fortunately, I would have joined NIAT in the height of COVID, in the midst of COVID. And at the time, we did do virtual hearings. Rightly so, there were significant challenges because you have a number of persons who are disadvantaged, who aren't able to work with the technology. But right now, we do sort of hybrid hearings. We accommodate persons who can work virtually, but the reality is the legislation doesn't cover us. So it's important that we get the legislation to cover us. We do not accept the electronic signature, so persons need to still sign the documents and send it, as I'm still required to sign the decisions manually and send it out. But we do accommodate witnesses and persons who are out of the country virtually, and NIBTT has been cooperating with us on that. Even medical hearings, we accommodate the CMO virtually, because at the time during COVID, he was here, there, and everywhere. So we started having these hybrid hearings where he would do the first 2 hours, and then we go on to a regular hearing. So we have been using it, but
the pain point remains that we need to look at the legislation to allow for this. So the legislation again, the legislative framework again surfaces as one of those issues that needs to be addressed, given we're 54 years old, and we need to have we need to understand the dynamics of the changing population, but also the changing environment in which we operate.
Yes, and recommendations were submitted to the then PS, asking...
PS Ministry of Finance.
Correct, yes, asking for some intervention to treat with those things, including the structure as well as virtual hearings. Yeah.
Thanks, Ms. Carrington. MP Manning, I think you had a question, and then Minister Batiste.
Thank you, everyone. I believe between the NIB, I believe Inland Revenue, and the Ministry of Social Development, the three of you would, I think, issue the most checks in this country on a monthly basis. Has there been any thought in terms of unifying some of those operations, some of the back-end work that I think the three of you would have in common in terms of reducing that cost and the logistics there? Also, as the MP for San Fernando East, I received quite a few complaints about the NIB. The main complaint being the length of time between applying for the benefits and actually receiving those benefits. What is being done to mitigate that time frame? Thank you.
So, Member, thank you. In terms of the interactions or the opportunity for partnership between the BIR, social welfare, and NIB, absolutely. I agree with you that as I said before, we are a paper-based organization, and a number of our benefits are still paid via checks. So I am... no, I don't. But and actually, we have commenced a drive to move persons off of checks and into direct deposits. But we do have a number of customers who, of course, still want the check. They still want to be able to come, receive the check in the mailbox, and actually make it a day to go to the bank and to transact in the bank. I guess it is. But we have been trying to get our customers to move into a digital platform. With respect to our turnaround time, I think Andy is anxious to speak to that.
Yes, thank you, Member, for the question. I think in one of our submissions, we would have mentioned, especially for long-term claims. Long-term claims are our most significant claim, representing maybe about 90% of our beneficiaries, representing retirement, survivors, and invalidity. And our turnaround time, or I should say for long-term claims, is 90 working days. And on average, for the last 3 years, we would have been able to determine 86% of our long-term claims within the 90-day working day period. And so about 14% of our claims on average for the last 3 years would have been outside of the turnaround time. And so there are a number of reasons why some claims eventually become outside of the turnaround time. One might be the complexity of the claim. Another might be the result of the need for the NIB to do specific investigation on the matter. And another issue might also be delays related to waiting for information from agencies or third-party agencies, right? And so that might cause some delay. And for instance, we have what we call reciprocal agreements with CARICOM, so CARICOM Islands, and also reciprocal agreements with Canada. What that means is that we can utilize contributions from persons who would have worked in Canada and Trinidad and Tobago to work out eligibility for certain benefits. And so sometimes we have to wait on information in order to process claims from these, either CARICOM or from Canada, in order to complete processing of claims. And so those are just some examples.
And these will be paper-based as well? Because, I mean, somebody in Canada, they can upload the documents, presumably, as opposed to sending them by mail.
Actually, we have revised our system in how we work with Canada. It's the NIB that contacts the Canada Social Security Organization and then awaits information. But most recently, we have changed how we operate, and hopefully that will bring some fruit into having a quicker turnaround time where that is concerned, because we now engage them through a portal. And I think we have now added some additional information that will facilitate a faster search on their end, which we have really recently would have engaged them on that matter. But for CARICOM, we still receive some delay in waiting for information from customers.
And it's on that point that I was asking the mode of delivery. Is it that people submit digitally? So whether it's from CARICOM, so let's deal with the CARICOM. It's digital submission, or you have to wait for the CARICOM boat to come in?
I think it's through an email. Through emails, MIO? Yes. Would that be so? Yes, through emails that we would communicate through with our CARICOM, other social security organizations, and through with Canada through
the portal and the arrangement that you have. So it is possible, probable, can be contemplated that locals can also submit information to you via email?
Well, we currently have an appointment system. Yes, we know where persons must come in and engage, but there's a process in which we have to assess the claims. And because it's still paper-based and manual, we require persons to come into our organization. But I know the executive director will soon speak about Empower and the great benefits that will derive from that. And eventually, we'll be moving away from that paper-based submission and allowing persons now to engage with us, without having to come to the service center. And so that is something that we have to look forward to, and I know will be expounded on further.
All right, we're going to get to Empower in a little while. MP Manning, did you have any follow-up question? No? Minister Batiste, I recognize Minister Batiste, Senator Dan Paul, and Minister Maraj Kama in that order. Sorry, my apologies, sorry. Minister Sobers had a follow-up question to Minister Manning's question. My apologies.
And this may very well be my last intervention. Minister MP Manning, actually, when I was raising the issues concerning the submission of documents for the funeral grants, he made a good intervention by saying that if it is the applicant did not have in their possession the valid identification by virtue of an expired identification card, no birth certificate, no passport, whatever, that an affidavit could have sufficed. I would go further to add to that a statutory declaration could suffice. Has that ever been a consideration on the part of the NIB to accept any one of those documents in lieu of having the ID card, the passport, or the birth certificate?
I don't think that may have been a consideration, but certainly, having had the opportunity to hear what has been expressed today, we will definitely take that back and consider what other adjustments can be made.
You all understand the efficacy of those documents, right? I mean, just generally, I'm just asking.
I'm sure in considering whether, how, and these documents will be used, we will definitely have to engage our legal department, and we will determine whether what is feasible and what may not be feasible.
Right. Secondly, I am also informed that when some persons make applications for these death benefits, there's a question posed by some CSRs whether or not the deceased person or the applicant now who's making the application on behalf of the deceased person, if they could provide a bank statement for the deceased person, although they have provided the NIB numbers to demonstrate the payments. Is that, are you all aware of that at all?
No. The bank statement that is requested by our CSRs is in support, is the top part of the bank statement. Basically, for example, if the person is making the application and they wish for the funds to be deposited into the account, then we require the top part of the bank statement, which
to verify
the name, address, and account number of the applicant. Not the details of the statement, but just the top half of it.
To deposit the money into the deceased account?
No, to deposit the money into the applicant's account.
Really, it's a verification process, because sometimes people transcribe, repeat bank numbers incorrectly for whatever reason. Maybe it's the moment you're bereaved and you're confused. And I know that there is that verification. So send the top part. So it could be that the person who is receiving the information and the person who is disseminating the communication, there is miscommunication. So person say a bank statement and think you want to get a bank statement. What they really want to do is just to verify the banking information.
But this is only in regards to the applicant wanting the money to be transferred to them, as opposed to the money going to the funeral home.
Yeah, it's the information of the applicant. So if the applicant is John Doe, then we will require the top half of John Doe's statement to submit the monies into that account as a verification step.
Right, no, I'm just making it clear that it is because the money is to be transferred to the applicant's account as opposed to the funeral home. Because you all cut checks to the funeral home, correct?
I will ask my head of operations. Correct, Sean?
The check would be made payable to the name of the person in the funeral home. So what you're just stating is the banking information application would be required to confirm the banking details.
All right, so
no, Mr. Subas,
you understand what I mean?
No, and I think I understand where you're going, and I want to give the NIB the opportunity to submit us in writing the process by which death benefits are paid to individuals who are in possession of valid national identifications, to individuals who are not in possession of said national identifications, and how they treat with funeral homes when funeral homes make those applications. Am I correctly capturing your query?
To a large extent, Chair. However, what I'm finding very confusing, if I am the applicant coming to the NIB to get this funeral grant, I've identified a bona fide funeral home, as bona fide as they can be, to do the funeral, and I want the $7,500 to pay to the funeral home. I have the document from the funeral home saying that I am the applicant. I am reliably informed that the NIB is saying to the applicant, well, here what's going on. we'll pay you the money to carry to the funeral home. But apart from the other documents that you've presented, we need a bank statement from you to demonstrate your what, your account number and proof of address, or your account number? Your account number.
Account number.
Right. And I'm saying that in the context within which we live, there are many people within this country who don't have bank accounts.
Who are not bankable. Okay, all right, that's the question you're raising. So, all right, so yeah, they're unbankable. So we would still, I think I would like, we now have a better understanding of the minister's question and concerns. So if we can get a written submission from the NIB clarifying the various scenarios and under what circumstances a bank statement is required, well, a banking number, the extract from the bank statement is required to verify the banking information. So if you can have that clarity in writing from the NIB, so it again provides, and I have to say that we're stimulating a lot of discussion online, so we're going to get to those questions, but I know that I have colleagues around the table who have questions, and we have Minister Batiste, Senator Dan Paul, and Minister Maraj, to my right, the Deputy Chair, in that order, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Really a clarification. Since earlier, I wanted to just get some clarification on this issue, this funeral grant. So, Chair, notwithstanding what you have, it probably would address it, but you kept saying at one point the issue of an invoice and the name on the invoice, and I was concerned with that because I know an invoice presupposes somebody paid and they received that invoice. So I wanted to get some clarification, because whether we are talking about pro forma invoice, if we're talking about an invoice, we can have a situation where a person, unfortunately, the passing of a parent, and the person who is taking care of this funeral arrangement could be either unemployed or could minimum wage. They don't have savings to pay anything. But they wanted to get support from the NIB and trying to get the funeral grant. So I would like to know how you treat with that kind of situation where a person cannot pay to have an invoice to come and present, but they need the money up front to pay. And whether or not the whole issue of pro forma invoices can be used in that regard, or what, if not that, what would be the process?
So, member, notwithstanding the fact that we will respond in writing on this matter, allow me to clarify that what I would have said is that the application must be accompanied by a completed application form, a copy of the death certificate, and a copy of an invoice, of a receipt, a receipt. I think Andy may have mentioned the word invoice, but it is a receipt that is required. And since... No, I said receipt.
Right, so I'm just saying the difference being, if you could clarify the difference.
So which is it? Is it a receipt or an invoice?
It is a receipt.
So you have to have already paid?
Well, I'm coming to that.
Okay, all right, because that is I think that's the essence of Minister Batiste's question.
We have paid funeral grants based on as little as $1 being paid down as a receipt. So we don't expect that because we serve the most vulnerable in society, we understand that they may not have those funds up front to pay for the funeral. So even if a small nominal fee is paid, we will accept that receipt and pay $7,500 off to that person. Am I clear, Chair?
Absolutely, and I think it was important so that the public understands that, because again, we're assuming perfect information, and information may not be perfect. So thanks again for that. Minister, did you have other questions? Because I wanted to read one or two from online. Minister, you have questions?
I think I want to defer for the follow-up from the online questions, Chair.
So One question, well, two questions that I find particularly interesting. We're going to come back to the members around the table. I just don't wish our viewing and listening public to feel as if we're ignoring them. And I think this question is going to have some traction. Does the NIB have a help desk to assist business owners register and complete all compliance requirements? So I'm going to park that there. And the second question is likely to resonate with members of the population. Person unnamed was told, I was told that my contribution was given to someone with my same name. My question is why the NIB will tell the person to go to every ministry to get the pay record cards. I truly believe the NIB should do investigation to get the information needed. I am dealing with the NIB for 14 years and only last year I was told this. Apparently the person is saying, if I can understand from what is written here, that he or she is now being told to go and visit every place that they work to get the records and then submit them to the NIB, which I know in my other lives to be partially true, that people are asked to go and fill the blanks. But essentially, one, fill in the blanks over if they've had different employment spurts at different places. So one, how can we make that process less tedious in terms of if someone had different employers, what kind of information they can, even now we can tell persons who may be casual employees at different places, make sure you keep this information because as time goes on, you might have a 25 or 30-year-old listening or viewing. What kind of information can we tell them from now that they need to ensure that they keep so that when the appropriate time comes for them to make a submission, they will have all of the necessary information? So that's the one question in terms of that last question that I read out. On the first one, is there a support system in place, a support desk at the NIB for small business owners who want to do the right thing and to register and to ensure that they are compliant?
So, member, allow me to address the second one first, and I'll pass the first over to Andy. With respect to your second question in terms of contribution statements and why additional information is required, I just again, by way of context, employers submit data into the NIB. We rely heavily on the accuracy of that data from our employers. So every month, the employers are required to complete what is called a 184 form, which is where the details of all the employee, and the income that is made, and of course, accompany that by a 187 form, which is the payment form. What we have seen, Chair, is that from a vast majority of our employers, we have seen incorrect data coming into the NIB. Now, my system, because this is not the Empower system, and it actually gives credibility as to why we are moving to Empower. The current insurance administration system digests that incorrect data. So we have seen at the NIB incorrect NI numbers, incorrect names, missing date of birth, a suite of incorrect information coming into the NIB where some of our employers are submitting data that is incorrect or absent. When that data comes into the NIB, Chair, it is almost impossible to upload to the respective contributor. So it then goes into what we call an error file, and from that error file, additional details and investigations are done. So allow me to say that with the person, the online caller, when that happens, the contribution statement is not accurate. So of course, every year you should have 52 contributions per annum, right? The information is incorrect. You come into the NIB, my contributions are missing, etc. We have been asking customers, please, as an alternative form, please let us have your pay records or TD4s. So if I could make an appeal to the public, it will be to keep your TD4s with you, because in the event that your contribution statements are incorrect, we will be relying on that, Chair, to update your contributions. But allow me to make a plug for Empower. Because Empower...
I want to hold the Empower, because Empower is a whole conversation by itself, and that digital transformation. So I want to, if we can just park Empower for a while, because I want to raise some questions because we assume that moving digitally will solve all of our problems. You've just said to the country that we have employers who systematically may be submitting incorrect information for their employees, and Empower can't fix that. Empower is not going to fix employers sending in incorrect information. So employers will correct if I send you incorrect information?
Yes, Chairman, because they're front-end validations with our portals. So that's why there's a need, an urgent need to move to Empower, because right now what we have, the information is coming in on a piece of paper that looks like this, and it is being digested and ingested by my system. With the Empower system and with the employer portal, there are front-end validations of the data that is coming in. So the data that will be coming in must be clean and will therefore be immediately uploaded, Chairman, to the claimant's contribution statement. So Empower will solve this problem.
Okay, we're going to get a follow-up question, and then I move to yes, Senator Dan Paul and to Minister Murad.
Yeah, sorry about it. Thank you. That reminds me of another complaint I've gotten, where I know I meet the public all the time. Some members of the public have complained that the employer had not been submitting contributions. And then, of course, then they come to the MP and say, what do I do? And, they've gone to the NIB, they've tried to straighten it out, and then the NIB asks them for a slew of information that they just don't have. What can be done to resolve that situation?
May I just piggyback on that question again, Chair's prerogative? Are there penalties for employers who don't remit payments?
Absolutely, yes.
What kind of penalties? I mean, and not to remove from responding to MP Manning's question, but what kinds of penalties are they? Are they 54-year-old penalties or penalties that actually hurt?
I think we have annual interest of 15% annually, and then a 25% also penalty, and 100% after 5 years. Stand corrected from my MIO. After 5 years, if you have not paid, then your remission doubles. So there are very stringent penalties for not paying NIS contributions.
Yes, I know in your former, I know in your former and your current life, Minister Batiste.
No, my interest, have you all actually enforced against employers?
Of course, we have a system where we try to, once we do compliance audits, we seek to follow up. We have a recoveries department, and if after a certain amount of time we have not had success, that is transferred to our legal department, who will now go through the process in order to seek to recover persons who owe the National Insurance Board outstanding.
Including the imposition of the penalties?
Including the imposition of the penalties and interest.
You understand, what does a person do if they realize late that these payments were not being made on their behalf? What does that person do for restitution?
And just to piggyback on what my executive director just said, in that for some cases, because of the bad data we receive, somebody may not see their contributions and think that their employer may not have paid, when they may have in fact paid, but the data was not good enough and was rejected by our system. So that's one of the reasons why there could be a discrepancy between the employer who's saying that I have paid and the employee who's saying I have not seen my contribution reflected. All right, so we do have a complaint form. It's called an NI-99 form that persons can get online if they like, or even I think as well as in our service centers, and they can fill out the information, and which the information advises us about the complaint. I think it's any complaint they could put on there, including missing contributions on their contribution statement, and the NIBTT, through its compliance department, will do an investigation.
One last follow-up. I'm concerned in the sense that we were just dealing with the funeral grants. A person can pass away. What happens if you have a situation where to the son, he would say, no, my mother always worked and always contributed. But yet you now have a situation where NIS is saying, the NIB is saying, they're missing contributions. How would you all treat with that kind of situation? Because the person has passed.
If we're talking about the funeral grant requires eligibility of 25 contributions. So all you have had to have for your entire working career is 25, which is 25 weekly contributions. So it equates to 5 months or 6 months of contributions in order to be eligible for a funeral grant. And so they're often, even if there are gaps, we find that persons have at least worked for those amount of time. And if per chance there's a person who might be young and might have died young and contributions are missing and that is brought to our attention, then the NIBTT will seek to do an investigation.
I just wanted us to get back to thanks for those interventions, Mr. Edwards, MP Manning. I wanted us to get back to the second question or the first question in terms of the person who wants to know that I'm a small business owner. What support mechanism is in place at the NIB to help me be compliant?
We do have a customer care department, and so if there's any question, then persons can call our customer care department, but the process is that persons who want to register and become compliant will have to fill out our form, and I can't recall whether it's an NI1 or NI4 now. My MIU might be able to confirm, but it's one of those forms that we have that once you fill out, you can register with the NIBTT, any employer, and lodge it at any service center.
Okay, thank you. Senator Dan Paul, if I can ask you to pose, yes? I know you were waiting for a while to pose.
Fine, Chair. Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone, and thank you for attending. To the Executive Director, for the benefit of the national community, what is the relationship between the NIBTT and the Ministry of the People and Social Development?
Thank you, Member. So the NIB supports the Ministry of Social Development via a Memorandum of Understanding, where we provide information relative to applicants coming into the social development. So when applications are submitted to social development, those applications come over to the NIB via a secured portal, and we would provide information to the ministry relative to whether those persons are in receipt of a benefit. That information is then taken back into Ministry of Social Development, and I guess they would use that information to determine the application that they have before them. So we do have an arrangement. It is under a Memorandum of Understanding, and we do provide support.
An arrangement also with the Treasury Division of the Ministry of Finance, and as you're aware, there's an interim, and I'd like the National Committee to be aware of this also, there's an interim public service pension of $3,500 immediately on retirement. That's how it's supposed to operate in theory. I think it operates so in practice also. Are you aware of this, and is there a relationship between the NIBTT and the Pension Division of the Ministry of Finance?
No, Member. I'm not aware of a relationship, no.
But are you aware that there's a minimum public service pension of $3,500 interim?
Yes, I'm aware.
Okay. Thank you.
Minister Sicharan.
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask about the Empower project now?
Let me just open the floor. Let me just ask Minister Maraj to pose his question, and then we'll get to Empower. In fact, we may defer Empower to the next hearing because I want us to interrogate that, because while I consider myself tech savvy and all of these things, I am always reluctant to see digital solutions as a panacea, because there's some deep-seated systemic issues, and certainly the publics that NIB serves, not everyone is going to be digitally savvy. So when I hear conversations about moving people to online payments and stuff, I tend to get that feeling that, maybe we are not understanding the market that we're serving, but we're gonna get to that in a little while. I want to invite Deputy Chair Minister Maraj to pose his question.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a number of things I want to ask, but I'll cut it down. Yes. Okay, we talk about, I'm just going to be specific. Let's say the funeral grant. For the benefit of the listening and viewing public, that's only for people who have contributed to the NIB. I'm correct, right?
Yes, the deceased must have contributed at least 25 contributions.
Okay. So, you're a 54-year-old organization. And after all these years, the world has changed dramatically. In fact, ChatGPT, which we all use, was only launched in 2022. And there's a whole plethora there's an entrepreneurial explosion of people who are earning income, they're self-employed, and may never have a traditional employer. Content creators. When you walk in those pop-up, go and see those pop-ups. People making this little jewelry and that, and they're making sweet bread and da, da, da. What is being done to bring these people, the doubles man? What is being done to bring them into the system? So when they retire, they have something to get. When they die, their relatives have some funeral grant that they can get. What is being done proactively in light of the way the world is changing? We're going to lose a lot of traditional jobs to AI. You've got to face that reality. And increasingly, you have more and more people that are irrelevant to you. How are you becoming relevant to them?
I love the question, and I love it so much. I just want to piggyback. He spoke about the doubles vendors. So I have been working with a doubles vendor for the last 10 years. How am I reflected in the system? Not just the doubles vendor, the owner, but the person who I get up at 3 o'clock every morning and I go to work. How are we embracing? And we're 54 years old, but it doesn't mean that we have to end the way we started. So let's have that conversation. I think, thank you very much, Deputy Chair, for that question to the NIB.
Chair and members, it has always been the intention of the NIB to bring self-employed persons into the system. The legislative framework to back that, however, has never been put in place. Since 2015, there was a high-level working committee established between the NIB at the time, and I think that high-level working committee was cabinet appointed for us to look into bringing self-employed people into the national insurance system. That high-level working committee was reconvened again in 2019. I was a member of that high-level working committee, where the NIBTT did produce a document and a report regarding the benefits and needs to bring self-employed people into the system and the strategies to encourage participation. However, bringing self-employed persons into the system requires an injection of funds because there are certain things that need to be addressed. For instance, self-employed persons, to bring them in, one of the provisions was to apply age credits, which was a mechanism to encourage persons to come into the system, as well as co-payments, initial period where there would be co-payments where the government would partially pay persons NIS and eventually wean such person off after a period of time. And we had estimated that would cost us 245 million or so, or in excess of that. In fact, in our actuarial reviews over the last few years, we have always included a cost for those age credits and co-payments of contributions in anticipation that it could be eventually adopted. And it has consistently been a recommendation of every actuarial review that I could remember. And so that is something that the NIBTT has considered and is willing to work with our stakeholders to make that a reality in the future.
Thank you very much for that. And again, that information is very helpful for the average Trinbagonian out there who is listening, who's the neighbor telling them that this thing is happening, get registered, etc., etc. So I'm particularly grateful for the information that is being disseminated. I have I have a follow-up question from Minister Batiste, then Minister Sicharan, then Senator Dan Paul.
Just to be clear, for the public, right now there's no way that NIB can assist the person belonging in the informal sector at this point in time.
Not directly, but for the benefit of the working public. If there are persons who have been employed as salaried, and then they have gone into self-employment, there's a period in which once they apply to the NIBTT, I think the period of time is 18 months, after leaving salaried employment, they can apply for what is called a voluntary certificate, which allows that person to contribute voluntarily. So there is a way, if you were salaried and you are now self-employed and you apply to the NIBTT within 18 months, then you can receive a voluntary certificate and pay the contributions on your own volition.
And to be clear, that contribution would be the full contribution.
The full contribution, you will have to pay the employer and the employee part.
Once the individual commits to making those payments thereafter, during their period of self-employment.
Thereafter, yes.
Yes, okay. Okay, thanks for that intervention. Minister Sicharan and then Senator Dan Paul.
Thank you, Chair. To the NIBTT, the Empower project is your digital transformation initiative. And from the documents in front of us here, it will apparently replace outdated technology systems and enhance service efficiency. I'm also seeing that it's being deployed in 5 waves, and currently 1 wave is completed. My question to you is that given that Empower is currently employer-facing, that's from what I'm seeing here in front of me, what specific provisions have been made to ensure that claimants, particularly the elderly persons with disabilities, and those with limited digital literacy, are not disadvantaged during the transitional period before claimant-facing modules are fully operational?
If I may, Executive Director, I think I would want to invite the NIB back to have a more fulsome conversation around Empower. But I think this is an important placeholder, if I can call it that, in terms of where we are, where the NIBTT is in terms of that digital transformation. But if I can ask you to hold the response while I ask Senator Dan Paul to pose his question so that we can have a final round of responses and as it were.
Thank you, Chair. Just to come back to the earlier conversation on your relationship with the Ministry of the People and Social Development. Could you explain it also in the context of the senior citizen grant or the old age pension as sometimes called?
Remember, you're asking about our relationship with the Ministry of Social Development.
Not just the relationship, but how do you reconcile? Yeah. How do you reconcile the NIB grants with the social, with the senior citizen grant? So it's not just a relationship, but how do you reconcile those two?
The NIBTT currently persons are able to access the NIBTT's pension at age 60. And so the minimum pension is $3,000. Persons can, of course, receive more than $3,000 depending on their history of contributions and other factors. But at age 65 is where persons can now access the social.
Before you continue, for the benefit of the National Committee, could you explain the cap?
The cap?
Yeah, there's a $5,000 cap on the combination of the...
Yes, right. So I was actually getting to that point, because when we reach the age 65 is when the person can now apply, and there's a means test that is applied at the Ministry of Social Development to determine how much persons, what a person will qualify based on the income that they currently earn. And so for persons who would, who have no income, then they could qualify for the full $3,500, which is the maximum benefit, I believe, right? The maximum benefit from social welfare. However, if you have income, from other sources, and the NIBTT for a lot of people might be their sole income at retirement at age 65, then based on the means test, I think that you can go and apply for an additional $2,500 once there's no other income at play. And so in the strict case, where there's a $3,000 at 65, then somebody can go to the Ministry of Social Development and receive an additional $2,500.
Thank you. And that, to follow up on that question, could you give the national community a brief explanation as to why the retirement age was raised to age 65? Just a brief understanding of why it is that was done.
MP Manning, I think you were out of the room. We just wanted to round up a question. We were trying to round up, and we recognize that given the wealth of information that the NIBTT has to share with the population and the questions that are flowing as part of our discussion, we agreed that we will invite them on another occasion to share more information. So if I can ask you to hold that question, because there was actually a question in hand that they needed to respond in terms of the Empower. So if I can ask you just to hold that, the Secretariat will take note of the question. It will form one of the questions that will go to NIBTT for response in the interim. I think the next meeting may be scheduled for May, but we will advise on that. But there was a question posed by Minister Sicharan on the Empower, and very briefly, while we recognize that we will have an opportunity to explore and to elaborate on the Empower and what it is meant to do to close those paper-based gaps that we have had over the last 54 years, if I may give Ms. Persad-Poliah the opportunity to just respond in terms of Empower and its current configuration being more focused on employers. And I think that was the gist of Minister Sitaran's question to you. It's currently based primarily on employers, and there is a lag and some conversation around when employees would be on, that phase of the Empower project would be ruled out. Yes, Minister.
I want to just piggyback on
the Empower question.
On the Empower question.
Very briefly.
Very briefly.
Very briefly, and this will form the closing remark, the response from, because we are mindful of time, because we do have some members who have to attend a sitting of the House in a little while, so we want to give them sufficient time to have a break. So if I can ask Minister Batiste to pose his question and ask Ms. Persad-Poliah to use the opportunity to respond to that and to give any closing remarks, and then I'll invite Ms. Carrington to do likewise.
Well, the question is really to Mrs. Carrington, NIAT, in so much that you treat with appeals. And I want to know if there's some common thread or general issues that you will deal with that would come to you, so that you may have established issues as it relates to what NIB would treat with claims. Because my question, therefore, is whether Empower is also geared towards treating with issues that would fall to the tribunal, because I would have recognized that you do allow a number of appeals, meaning that you would have found some issues with how NIB would have treated with a particular claim or claims. So whether the Empower took into consideration whatever, assuming there's learning taking place between the organizations, and that Empower also addresses those issues.
If I may ask Ms. Persad-Poliah to respond to the question posed by Minister Sicharan, and make your wrap up, and then I can invite Ms. Carrington to respond to Minister Batiste's question specific to Empower, and also use the opportunity to give your closing remarks. We can do it that way. Thank you.
So, Chairman, I welcome the opportunity to come back and discuss Empower, because Empower, it's almost impossible to to discuss the complexity.
Tracy, what Empower can do.
In 2 minutes, but I'm going to give it my best shot. So Empower is our enterprise-wide transformational system that aims to move away from all the traditional methods of service and modernize our operations, basically. I would have shared initially that we are a heavily paper-based organization, so Empower provides us with the tools to move away from paper into a digital framework. The intention, of course, is to ensure that we provide a modernized, digital-friendly system to support operational and cost efficiencies, to ensure data-driven governance, because I would have mentioned the front-end validations, etc., to provide analytics that will allow for us to manage and pivot with respect to the feedback that is coming in, and just general governance and compliance.
Business re-engineering, so to speak. Empower is going to allow you to do some business process re-engineering.
Chairman, just quickly, what is the estimated cost and the time frame?
So remember, it is a significant cost that we have undertaken with respect to Empower, and I appreciate the question, but I would ask for an opportunity to respond to you, Chair, in writing on that matter.
All right, absolutely, and I think that is a perfect point at which we can ask Ms. if you have any closing comments that you wish to make. Yes,
I do. In fact, I didn't get an opportunity, member, to answer your question, Dr. Sicharan's question. But I really wanted to share that Empower is being rolled out in waves. So we would have already implemented phase 1, which is our internal HCM system, which was done in August of 2024. We then went ahead to implement our Finance Fusion, which was done in September of 2024. And what we have before us now is our phase 3 operations, which is being rolled out in 5 waves. What you would have seen is wave 1, what we're calling our Empower employer onboarding. That is where we are asking all of our employers to join us online and on board with us, which will give you secured access to your portal, which is wave 1. That began last year, April of 2025, member, where we are asking persons to join us on board, come on board and register with us as an employer, to use the employer portal. Wave 2 is soon to be realized, which is the replacement of our insurance administration system with our new OIPA system. And phase 3 is being rolled out in 5 waves. Wave 1 would have been the employer onboarding. Wave 2 is our OIPA new system. Wave 3, Chairman, is what we would like to share very quickly with you, which is called our Empower Employer Portal. Our employer portal will give immediate access to our employers for all the services that they right now interact with the NIB for. So through that portal, once you sign up, you'll be able to submit contributions, make payments, request and receive your compliance certificates, and every transaction that you do right now with the NIB in the service center, you will be doing from the comfort of your home with 24-hour access from your home or office via your employer portal. Similarly, we are launching as part of our operations what is called Wave 4, or our employee or personal portal. So in addition to the employer portal, which is where the employer will transact all the business that they do with the NIB, you, Madam Chair, will have your personal portal where you will submit claims and request contribution statements and do everything else that you ordinarily do with the NIB via the service center, you will then do via your portal. And our 5th and final wave is where both portals speak to each other. So we call portal-to-portal connectivity, where, for example, as you know, there are some claims where the employer is required to complete a portion of it. Portal-to-portal will allow for the employers to also complete that electronically. So member, I would, Chairman, I welcome the opportunity to come back and speak to you on employer.
Just quickly, with regards to the employer onboarding, how does an employer register or enter that system?
Right, so I will probably use that as my closing remarks, because I really want to make an appeal to the public, especially to our employers, to join us on board, to join us online and to on board with us. So if you visit our website, www.nibtt.net, to the top left-hand corner, you're going to see an Empower Hub. If you click there, you're going to find a wealth of information relative to Empower and all the services that it will bring, including how you can onboard as an employer. It's a very simple process, Chair, and we are asking our employers to please come on board and onboard with us early so that when the portal is open in the coming months, because the portal will be open very soon, you will then be able to transact your business with us digitally from the comfort of your home, your office, 24/7, wherever you are in the world. You'll be able to deal with the NIB via your secured portal. So I ask again, Chair, in my final closing remarks, I want to appeal to all the employers in the country to please join us on the onboarding process.
Thank you for that. And as I said, we are here to learn and we're here to give the NIB the opportunity to empower the population to take advantage of the services and support available. I will not be devil's advocate and ask you if on the personal side, if when I sit in the comfort of my home and I submit my claim, whether it will be dealt with faster. But it's not, that wave has not been opened as yet, so I wouldn't want there to be any sort of glitches. So thank you very much for that, Mrs. Persad-Poliah. Ms. Carrington, if I can ask you to respond. I think there was a question in terms of empower and the NIAT, if you can respond to that question posed by Minister Batiste, and if you can also use the opportunity to provide us with any closing remarks that you may have.
Okay, thank you. We have not had much discussions with NIBTT with respect to Empower. Our previous conversation and the conversations we have had with respect to the use of technology related to case management. And I'm not sure if I missed it, but I don't think I heard you mention the opportunity for NIAT to access documents that would allow us to have more efficiency in terms of the appeal process. So we can look at the interview documents, your file information that gives reason for your disallowance in a real-time manner, as opposed to us having to wait on you to send down documents.
So that sounds like a perfect platform for us to take off the conversation and empower on the next occasion, because we appreciate that it's a work in progress.
Yeah.
And if this conversation, if in the discussion on the cross-fertilization of ideas, we can throw out suggestions that will improve the efficiency of Empower, both to the benefit of NIBTT and to the benefit of NIAT, and also, most importantly, the benefit of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, I think we should not rush that conversation. We should allow that to germinate and then to essentially have, you know, the best possible kinds of conversation and cross-fertilization of ideas. So I wouldn't want us to sort of go in there and to rush that at this particular stage, but do note that on the next occasion, I think we would want to explore and to interrogate that some more, Ms. Carrington, from the perspective of NIAT. And you are correct, I didn't hear it, so it would be an opportunity for us to interrogate that.
The other part of the question you asked were the issues, the main issues that come before us, because you said you saw some reversal in decisions. Now, one of the things we note significantly is that NIBTT won't always utilize the alternative evidence provided by an employee at the point in time of the submission of a claim. Sometimes they would have entertained it later on, but the person, to safeguard themselves, will file an appeal. So an example would be where a person went in for a retirement benefit expecting to get a pension and got a grant because they didn't make the 750 contributions. But subsequently, they went back to their former employers, they got either sworn affidavit from employees, or they got TD4 certificates. They present these things and we would entertain them, and of course, the decision would be reversed, so this person may now qualify either for an enhanced grant or a retirement pension. But we also have cases where there are medical impact, where you have permanent and partial disability being reduced by NIBTT's medical advisor. And in that regard, we then have to bring in the CMO to have that discussion as to why the permanent partial disability was reduced, although the medical doctor would have indicated this is what the person should qualify for. So you have those, and once the CMO indicates that he's in agreement with the PPD that was previously granted, again, we would reverse that decision. You also have a number of survivors' benefits. So it really relies heavily on alternative evidence, and the tribunal has that opportunity to review alternative evidence and make a ruling once it's on a matter of fact.
Thank you for that, Ms. Carrington. I appreciate it. I really have to be mindful of the time, Minister Batiste, so I crave your indulgence, and we can always continue the conversation on another occasion. As I said, I am very grateful as a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago for having had the opportunity to hear all about the work of the NIBTT and NIAT. I have to admit that up until this inquiry was framed, I was not aware of the work of NIAT, so I would like to thank Ms. Carrington and Mr. Ramalochan for joining us today, as well as the representative from the Ministry of Finance, and for sharing all of the useful information, and to the entire NIBTT team. They say time flies when you're having fun, and clearly we were having a lot of fun this morning. Who knows that 2 hours have flown past so quickly, but I hope that sufficient information has been put into the public space to generate conversations. I would like to state that we would wish to invite both the NIBTT officials and the NIAT officials back for continuation of this conversation. The Parliamentary Secretariat will communicate with you in terms of the date that we've identified, because I think the information that is being shared and the suggestions that are being made, one of the things that has come out very squarely in my mind that resonates with me is clearly there is a need for legislative reform. After 54 years, there are a number of dynamics, including the online, the self-employed, the content creators, all of these kinds of conversations. But even as we bandy the number 750 around, I know there are people out there who have no clue that there is a minimum threshold that has to be met. So the information is absolutely important. So I would like to thank, on both sides, I would like to thank the delegation from the NIBTT. I would like to thank the representative from the Ministry of Finance. I would like to thank both Ms. Carrington and Mr. Ramalochan from the NIATT. I would like to thank, for the benefit of the population, there is a parliamentary team that works behind the scenes. So when you see me sit here, you see the members asking questions, it's not that we have gone and done all the research. We have a very brilliant research team supporting us on this committee. So I would like to thank them publicly for their hard work into the night and up until this morning, sending out documentation. I would like to thank our viewing and listening audience. I would like to thank those persons who submitted questions, and I also invite you to continue sending questions to the Parliament via the various platforms for any feedback and discussion that any other issues that you may wish to raise based on today's public hearing. If it is that you're not tech savvy, find somebody who could submit a question on your behalf based on the information that we have shared with you today. So again, I would like to say thank you to everyone who has viewed, the supporting team that has made this broadcast possible. To my fellow members of the committee, I would like to thank everyone for their active participation. And with those few words, I would like to bring today's inquiry to a close and look forward to chatting with the delegates from the NIBTT and the NIAT, joined by our colleague from the Ministry of Finance on the next occasion. So thank you so much, and I bring today's inquiry to a close.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.